Everybody has a story, and every story needs to be heard. To learn from others' mistakes, be inspired by their journey, and be challenged to apply what we learn from it is how we grow as individuals and leaders. On this podcast, we are talking with each member of the General Conference Leadership Council. I am your host, Alyssa Truman, and this is A&N Profiles. Today I'm here with Korey Dowling, who is the Vice President for People and Cultures for Adventist Development and Relief Agency, or as we better call it, ADRA. Welcome, Korey.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm excited to learn more about you, your story. So how long have you been with ADRA?
ADRA since 2016, so that's, going on nearly 7 years.
Okay, so for 7 years you've been working with ADRA, but obviously there's a lot of backstory to how you got where you are. So let's go back a couple years, because I know we're both very young, so it's just a couple years ago. Tell us a little bit about your childhood, your family.
Okay, had a wonderful childhood. You know, the typical Adventist family. I'm second generation Adventist. Grew up in the church, have wonderful parents, a great older brother. Went to Adventist schooling all my life, Adventist churches. Had a really fond memories of my childhood right through till going to college. It's been I've had a very blessed life, but a very typical Adventist life too.
Okay, so I know we love to say this, but as an American, obviously you're not from maybe the same place I am from. So where were you raised, Korey?
In Australia, in Brisbane, Australia. Was born in Sydney. We were the very good Adventist family who would drive 10 hours to go to an Adventist hospital so I could be born in the Sydney Adventist Hospital. We are that Adventist, which is great.
Wait. So your mother's in labor and we drive 10 hours?
She went earlier, a few months earlier.
Okay.
To stay with her parents who were down in Sydney. Her father was also a pastor, director of youth ministries, and so he was working in Wahroonga. So she went down a few months earlier to have me in the Adventist hospital.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. I'm just, I've had 3 children, Korey, and so and obviously you have
3 children,
children as well. And I just am envisioning me being in labor and my husband saying, let's get in a car and drive 10 hours. And
that's not going to happen.
So Adventism is very much in your roots. It's, kind of just sounds like you grew up, we are Adventists, and not just like we're Adventists, but like we work for the church and we are part of this. You said you went to an Adventist school. Tell me a little about school, Adventist education when you were growing up in Australia.
It was good. It was a great Adventist education, wonderful teachers. It was, you're immersed in the church. And as I look back, my whole life was within the church. You from schooling with other Adventists to going to church on the weekends, and all my friends were Adventists, so everything was within that ecosystem. So I didn't really get out into the real world until after schooling. But looking back at my school at Brisbane Adventist College, it was a great experience and one I really cherish.
Did you have any teachers that really mentored you or inspired you?
Yeah, there was one in particular. He actually died recently, Mr. Miller. He was only ever a relief teacher for me, but he's just someone that stood out. He had that tough love about him, and I always learned so much better when he was teaching. Just the way he went about things, and he was no nonsense, which didn't work for everyone, but it worked for me, and I really excelled under his teaching. But I look back at all of my teachers, and I learned something from all of them. I can honestly say I didn't have a bad teacher, which is a blessing for sure.
That is.
Yeah.
Not everyone can have that same experience, so that's a gift. So Mr. Miller was tough love. That actually tells me a lot about your personality. I had a very similar experience where I had this teacher, and it was actually the no-nonsenseness about him that is why his name is Mr. Buller. He was actually the music teacher.
Okay.
And it was actually his no-nonsenseness that helped me become who I am. I think sometimes we think we just need this like, oh, super loving, whatever. But you can still be loving and hold people to like a higher standard. And for my personality, I needed that.
Okay.
So were you in Pathfinders and all those typical things? You said you're in this Adventist ecosystem. So how far does this ecosystem?
Not to Pathfinders. I started in Pathfinders, but I wasn't allowed to go on the campouts because I had a breathing difficulty as a child. So parents weren't comfortable with me going on to campouts, so I never did. So after I started Pathfinders, but 2 months in, without going on the camping, I lost interest, and no, I didn't finish Pathfinders.
That's a shame, Korey. You could have been a master
I could have been
guide.
the Mr. Adventist.
You could be. It was that's the only thing that was holding you back. Okay, so you went to college.
Yes.
And
not at an Adventist school.
Okay, so this is when you move out of the bubble.
This is when I moved out of the bubble. Yeah.
Did you feel like it was hard moving out of the Adventist bubble? Because a lot of people talk about the fact that we have become so insulated that we don't know how to deal with normal people. Like somehow we're not normal.
Yeah.
But how was that experience for you, moving from this Adventist ecosystem out?
Do you know, I didn't really notice it going to college, university in Brisbane. When I did first notice it was when I started working after my, studied for a few years, and then we actually went overseas and worked for a year, and it was in my next job when we came back to Australia, and I had no Adventist connections whatsoever, and working in there, when I look back at that time, it was actually really good because it actually helped me rethink some things and challenge my own belief system, because in the Adventist ecosystem, I sort of didn't have to really think for myself around my own beliefs and spirituality. It was wasn't ever really challenged until I started working with non-Adventists, non-Christians, even a few atheists. And when you start dialoguing with them, it actually forced me to think through why I believe what I believe and what helped to make my belief system. So that was good. It was a challenge I needed at that right time.
So I've heard you say we a couple times.
Yes.
So at some point you went from a you to a we.
Yes.
So how did your wife enter the picture?
Yeah, it's sort of a funny story. Again, because we're in this Adventist ecosystem, everyone knows everyone, and you nearly need to check familial connections before you marry someone, just in case you're marrying within your own family, the literal family. But my parents and Kelly's parents knew each other through college days, and so there was always a connection with the family, and it nearly became an arranged marriage in some ways. Not in the traditional sense, but there was jokes going back and forth because at the time I was looking after music at Springwood Church in Brisbane, and Trafford Fisher, who's my father-in-law, was the lead pastor there, and so we worked a lot together, and I got to know him before I actually got to know Kelly. And so he was always telling me about his daughter and just giving me updates on how she's doing.
Updates on his daughter that you've never met?
Well, we actually had met, but we didn't know we'd met. We actually were in a picture together, and we didn't realize till later we're actually in that same picture.
A picture of?
Oh, this is when she was studying nursing down in Sydney, and I went down to visit my cousin, and we were at a nursing social event on a Saturday night. I was there catching up with my cousin, and she was there, and we didn't know each other at the time. We're in this picture together, and then many years later we realized that was actually the first meeting. So it felt like an arranged marriage. She was actually living in London at the time, and so obviously Trafford is giving me updates on how she's going, and he's giving her updates on how I'm going, and she's saying, who's this guy? And he hadn't really had a good track record with setting her up in the past, so she wasn't holding out hope that I was a suitable person for her. But anyway, she moved back to Australia, and we officially met, and then a few months later we were together and been happy ever since.
Okay, let's explore this a little bit. So
okay.
She's in. You finished college at this point?
No, I was still studying. I was still in my last year. I had a year to go when she came back and we met.
Now, is this public university?
Yes.
All right, so you're in a public university, but you're still volunteering and working at a local church because Adventism,
of course,
it's in your veins. Your blood cells literally just say Adventist. But so you're working for this church, and this pastor is just telling you guys about each other nonstop.
Yeah, he fell in love with me before she did. Yeah, and that's, everyone knows that.
So she comes back. You start dating. Was she planning to go back?
She was. And we'd been going together for maybe a month or two, I think. And then she had planned to go back, and I was obviously trying to put the pressure on for her to stay, and in the end she did. So she stayed, and then we're obviously together, and I finished my college, my university, and then we got married. Then we went back together, back to London. So she finished her London adventure, but thankfully took me with her.
And what did you get your degree in?
In Bachelor of Business in Human Resource Management.
Okay. So we said your title at the beginning. It kind of sounds like a very fancy title, but is it basically HR?
It is. HR is a function within people and culture. It also covers things like culture, organizational culture, and organizational development and leadership growth, all of those sort of areas. So yeah, started my career in the HR area. We moved to London just after we were married, and I started working in, of all areas, psychometric assessment for organizations. So we would run assessment centers for organizations who are looking for either high potential employees or recruitment. And so I would be part of the team that would run these assessment centers to test people, run competency-based interviewing, and all of the things that candidates just hate doing, I actually love administering. So we would do all of that and then make recommendations on who's high potential or who's a possible good candidate for the organization.
So you moved to England?
Yeah.
It'd be England, yes. Yeah. I was like trying to make sure I had the right country there, right? So you moved to England, and this is your first time really kind of also out of this Adventist bubble.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So you've been kind of in Australia, and you've been surrounded by really familiarity. And you did go to a different college, but you still had this, Adventist kind of thing. But when you move to another location, sometimes it is hard to stay connected to the church. I've seen this with a lot of people. It's like, they come out of their college experience, whatever, and then they move to another location. It's like hard to get yourself into a new church. It's hard to like find that, and it just becomes a whole new thing. Was there any challenges that you experienced with kind of uprooting and moving to another continent, really?
Not really, because we were still within the Adventist ecosystem, because we were actually living with another couple who were good friends with, and they're longtime Adventists. Both of them come from division presidents and pastors, and so we could not escape the Adventist ecosystem. Not that we were trying to or looking for it, but even though I was working in the real world, the outside world, and so was my wife, we slipped straight back into church life. Started playing with the church we were going to. We already knew some people who were going there, and obviously the other couple that we were with. And then Australians, there's a real connection with London. A lot of us Australians go to London, and so we already had a number of Adventist friends who were already over there, so we reconnected with them, and it was sort of a revolving door of Australians who'd come and visit us. So we never really were away from that ecosystem too long.
So I think what I'm kind of hearing, though, is that community is what kept you connected.
Yes, for sure.
Because if you had moved there and maybe you didn't have this community of Adventists, but you'd created these friends, and it didn't matter where you were in the world, you had brothers and sisters, you had this friend circle that was there. Now, you are someone who is very involved, even to this day, at the local church level. It sounds like it started many years ago. Yes. What do you like to do at the local church level?
Music. I love music. So it was So we go to New Hope Church at Fulton, and it's music that got me connected again. And it wasn't actually until I started volunteering at the church in music capacity that I started to get connected with the church. I didn't really feel like I belonged there until I started actually being a part of the actual church service itself. So I love music. I play there every 2 weeks. And as a family, we get involved in all the different areas of ministry. But yeah, as I said, it wasn't until we actually started giving back to the church that we felt connected to that church. And so we started to create our own community there.
Why is it, do you think people struggle with that? Like, it's easy to come to a church, but never feel connected. Do you think it has to do with the lack of being a part of the community? You just said that made a huge difference for you. Tell us a little bit more. Like, what was it like before you were getting involved? In your community.
I think that's a good point. I think community certainly makes it a lot easier. It also depends on the type of personality you are. But I think community plays such an important role. Now, again, thankfully, we already knew people who were going to New Hope, actually relatives of ours, Gary and Bettina Krause. And so we instantly caught up with them, and that's where we started going to church at New Hope. So we already had some connection, but it was always distant connection. So if they weren't there, we weren't really into the ecosystem of the church until we started volunteering and being a part of it ourselves. And that's when we started making deeper connections with other members in the church. So it wasn't an immediate thing. And I think it's also a problem with bigger churches where you can sort of slip through the cracks, and it's a very welcoming church. That wasn't the problem. It's just that we also need to make an effort to get connected with people. And when you're first in a new country, and the US is a little different to Australia, it's a little harder to get into to get connected, I guess, with other members in the church. As I said, they were very friendly, but it wasn't until we actually started to become part of the church. We moved our membership to New Hope, started volunteering, and that's when we got into the ecosystem there.
Let's talk about how does involvement in church impact personal faith? Does your involvement, like where you were just attending, have you sensed a difference in your personal faith once you started becoming a part of and not just attending?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm going to sit on the fence on this one.
Okay.
So initially, I felt more connected when I was participating and giving back, and I felt that I had more purpose about going to church. But sometimes I think that can get me sidetracked. So it all then becomes about, so if I'm doing music, I get so focused on doing the music, and that's my participation at church, and I don't often then connect with anything else, if that makes sense. So as in, I get involved in the ministry aspect, but I'm part of the ministry to others. I'm not actually ministering to myself. So I don't often, I have to work harder to get a message out of, the church for that day, because I'm so focused on other things. And so if I'm not playing that day, I actually go along with more intent to experience and to hear what message God may be sharing through the pastor. So it's a bit of both. I want to go to church because I'm part of it, and if sometimes I find myself, if I'm not actually playing that day, I'm maybe we just tune in online and maybe not make the effort. But I know whenever I do make the effort and I'm not participating actively, I'm more likely to actually focus on a message that I'm probably needing to hear.
I think sometimes when people think of people who work for the church, we kind of feel like that we have it all together. Okay. And something that I've noticed is that for many of us, there's almost this struggle that you were kind of talking about. Like, our work becomes our relationship with God. Like, well, I do this. And so it kind of becomes this little bit of a struggle. It's kind of like what you're talking about, that fence. Like, it's like that you have that and it gets you that excitement, that enthusiasm, but it almost becomes that is my relationship, which is not the way it's supposed to be. The relationship is not about just my service. The relationship with God is about this deep, intimate, personal experience that sometimes gets lost in serving the church.
Absolutely. And this is a really important point, I think, because in my previous role, I was working for the South Pacific Division in Human Resources. And part of our orientation and onboarding was to actually talk about this specific point, because when someone comes to work for the church, they have an expectation on what that is like, based partly on their experiences in the past or their experiences at church, and there's no separation. So what they see and view in the church, they also expect in the organization, in the professional side. And it's actually important to align those expectations, because there is a difference. You know, we're all human, and working for the organization is different to going to church or to being part of a church. And I think we don't often handle that difference well, because you know, again, we have high expectations on how a church should operate because of our strong ethical foundations. And yet we are still human. And so humans make mistakes. Humans do things that we don't want them to do or don't expect them to do. And it can lead to significant disappointment when you see the organization not operating in a way that you would want them to. And often it's because you have a higher expectation of what they should do because of it's a church. You know, it's a church organization. So we used to spend quite a considerable amount of time talking through staff who were coming on board to saying, you know, you are going to see things that you may not agree with, or that you don't like, or that, you know, can sometimes cause your faith to be tested. And it's important to adjust your expectations and know that there is the church organization is still run by sinful humans, and there's going to be times when we're disappointed, and it's important to try not to let that affect your spiritual relationship with God, because I've seen, unfortunately, too many people who have either been poorly treated from the organization also affect their faith, and they walk away from the church as a whole unit rather than sort of keeping those two places a little bit separate.
My husband used to work at the Review and Herald publishing house, and I remember he was in one of the first waves of layoffs that they did as they were trying to figure out how to keep it going. They got rid of all of their designers. He's a graphic designer. And I remember we woke up the next morning, and for the first time, it's like he's not rushing to get out of bed or anything. Like, I mean, our entire marriage, you know, it's like he would get up, he would leave, you know, all these different things. And here we were just sitting there. And I remember us talking about it. And actually what you said just, it kind of resonated, because we remembered, it's like, this is not tied to who we are as people. This does not change our faith. Like, our faith isn't centered around how our employers are, it has to be stronger than that. And I know for some people who went through the exact same experience, it actually caused them to leave the church. So trying to figure out who our identity in Christ is in differentiation to our identity in the workplace. You may work for the church, but my identity is in Christ.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, I'm a 5th generation Adventist.
Okay.
So you said you were a 2nd generation Adventist. So we have this Adventism in our veins. Sometimes it's easy to just be an Adventist. We've been brought up in the ecosystem, but it doesn't mean that we actually have had our own conversion.
That was me. Yeah. You
said that was me. What was your defining moment? Because there's a moment where we have to make it real ourselves. Because if we don't, it just becomes this head knowledge and not heart knowledge.
Yes.
When did it become heart to you?
So, you know, there were a few moments that I think back. You know, I think back to, I think it was year 10, and we had the week of prayer, week of spiritual emphasis.
Real quick,
school.
year 10 for Americans. Is it like sophomore year?
I think so.
Okay.
I still don't understand.
It's like the second year in high school?
Third year.
Junior year?
if you say so.
Okay. Okay.
I have no
Keep
idea.
going. So year 10.
So year 10. And we had, you probably heard of Pastor Dick Barron, Elder Barron.
I have not. Tell me more about
so
him.
He actually passed away recently. Amazing preacher who came to our school. And he led the week of spiritual emphasis, the week of prayer. And I remember walking forward when he put a call out and putting my hand up for baptism. Now, I didn't think anything of it after, was sort of just waiting to be contacted. And somehow it slipped through the cracks. And I never had any contact by a youth pastor or pastor after that. And I don't blame them. But I just sort of, I forgot about it after that. I didn't actually get baptized straight away. And I just went back to my life again. And, it just became a routine. Going to church, playing, going to school, connecting with Adventist friends, doing all the Adventist activities. It was, you'd have moments of heart connection, but I just felt like I was just going through the motions. And look, even when I met Kelly and we were about to get married, I still wasn't baptized at that point. Not for any reason why I wasn't protesting or I wasn't not interested. I just hadn't.
Did your dad ever say anything?
Oh, look, we'd sort of talked about it, but I think I was just so in the Adventist ecosystem and doing all the Adventist things, it just didn't ever come up. Like, it wasn't like I wasn't an Adventist. I always thought I was, but I wasn't technically baptized.
So nobody was pushing you
no,
to be baptized?
No.
And some people probably just thought you were baptized.
Absolutely.
At this point.
So I got baptized a week before we got married, because you had to be baptized to be married in the church. And it sort of hit me then. I thought, oh, this is not so good. I'm in my 20s and I'm getting baptized now. Why didn't I think through this earlier? And so that sort of just started my thought process going. And then from there on, the best way I can describe it is sort of just like a slow burn. It just gradually built and built to the point where, I can always do better with my daily walk with Jesus, but it's more of a heart than a head knowledge now. It's more personal. It's more real for me. And it's through all of those life events that you sort of, the burner gets kicked up a level, when the birth of children and or you go through traumatic experiences and all of these sort of events just kick the burner up a little bit, and you sort of gets the relationship going again. And yeah, I'm a very avid follower of Christ. It's now just me. That's who I am. But it was never an immediate decision or a single decision. It was just that slow burn over a period of time to where I am now.
I kind of like that. We always hear it's like these like dramatic conversion stories, and I resonate to an extent with yours because like I was never the rebellious kid. I never questioned all the things in my faith. Like, they just made logical sense. Like, I read my Bible, they made sense. So I didn't need to like whatever. So it was just this like slow burn. Like, and just the further on in life, all those life experiences, as you said, the good and the bad, the easy and the hard, all of them, they just kind of helped me fall in love with my Savior more and more.
Well, I think for me, that slow burn was good because it gave me a good, strong foundation, and it gave me, I guess, a mature view of the church, so that when in later life, when, working in the church organization, you see things and things happen that you don't agree with or that make you uncomfortable.
Never happens.
No, never, of course. But it gave me a maturity to understand that that's different. That's not between my connection and Christ. That's decisions of humans, and it's within the organization side. And so they didn't ever test my faith, those moments, like I've seen other people, because I think I'd had just such this long, over many, many years, slow conversion. And it gave me time to put everything in its place, how I view the church and how I view our beliefs and all of that sort of thing. So I think I have a fairly mature view of, or mature understanding of my beliefs and how they align with the church, and that built over time. So it wasn't like this sudden thing, then you try and put the pieces in place after. Sort of did it reverse and built to it.
I like that. And I think that's important for people to understand that all of our stories are different. All of our conversion experiences are going to be different. And sometimes we look on and we think, well, have they had this, or, whatever. And it's not for us to even worry about. It's really between us and God.
Yes.
But I love that it was just, I love that you're giving us the story, because there's going to be so many people who are listening right now who resonate with that. And they're probably at some point have questioned, have I had the experience? Because we didn't have this huge, overwhelming, and I was sitting there and I was drinking, and then all of a sudden I gave it up. It's not that for everybody. And so somehow those of us who didn't have that happen, we question whether we've had the conversion.
Yes. And I did question that, because I remember thinking, why haven't I had that experience, that exact same thing? And often it's only when I look back on my life, I can then clearly see where God intervened, and I see his impression on my life, or how he stepped in to make things happen. At the time, I didn't. The move to the US was very much a God thing.
We're gonna get there. Let's move you back to Australia first, because we've kind of tangented, but this was a beautiful tangent, because I think this understanding that helps make the rest of the story make a little more sense. You moved back to Australia, and I think you said at the you moved back and you worked in the secular field for a while.
I did,
still.
yes. Yeah. Okay. So when we moved back from London, I started working as a business trainer, so training, lecturing students who are doing certificates and courses in business. And that's when we had our first child. So Emily was born. But it was actually working there that I started to actually question and test my faith, because I was working with an atheist who would push me. He would, question my beliefs, question a lot of things. And it actually made me stop and think, hang on. Because whenever people would ask the question, why are you a Seventh-day Adventist? Or what is a Seventh-day Adventist? It was always we go to church on Sabbath and Saturday, and we don't eat pork. Yeah. And it was all the don'ts that we do. Yeah. It was never about what the experience of knowing and loving Jesus was about. It was always about the list of things we don't do. And it wasn't until this guy started questioning me on some of those things. Why do you believe that? And I had to actually go back to the Bible and find out for myself, rather than being spoon-fed for so many years. I had to look into it for myself. And at that same time, we were also in a Bible study with a number of friends, or young marrieds, or with kids. And we weren't following the Sabbath school lesson, sorry, but we were hitting... We
will not tell the Sabbath school person ministries department.
We were hitting big issues that were relevant to us. So we would pick a topic and do a deep dive on that. And again, through that, started to get me thinking and get me actively searching for myself.
What are the things that were coming up from your coworker, as well as in this? What are the things that you're deep diving into?
So with the coworker, it was mainly about creation. He was I remember his first point to me was, "Oh, you're not one of those believers in intelligent design." And that's how we started sort of chatting about it. So I said, obviously, yes, I do. And so I would then try and make sure I was clear in my understanding from a biblical perspective. I had my beliefs, obviously, but that just sort of started the ball rolling, and then we just went from there.
And that's something where we have to generally dig a little bit deeper, because it's not like we all kind of go to school and like we come out and we know how to really talk about it. It's kind of like, well, we believe in Genesis 1 and 2, but it's like that's not enough when you are talking to people who have studied it and have come to the conclusion of evolution. Exactly.
So I couldn't just read from Genesis. I had to actually do my own research, and so I dived into it from a science side, and it was good because it actually reaffirmed why I confidently believe in creation. But it just made me do the research rather than rely on other people's research, and they'd tell me what the thing was. So then, as a Bible study group, we would just different basic things like, why Seventh-day Adventism, and what's the difference between Seventh-day Adventists and other religions? And so we'd do a study on different religions, and I think we shouldn't be afraid to explore. I think it's good to test our faith and to look at why we believe what we believe. We shouldn't be afraid of questioning. And so we did that. We actually dug into questioning, why are we Adventists, and even going through some of the core fundamental beliefs. And it was good because it helped to strengthen what I already thought. There's still some areas that I still have question marks on, and I think I'll always have question marks, but I think it's good because it forced us to actually deep dive on some key topics and understand why we do believe what we do.
I think that many appear to think that we don't want to have people question their faith. Again, I didn't question a lot. My 3 daughters, they do. And I realized that one of the greatest gifts that we can give is a safe place to ask these questions, which is what your community was doing.
Yes.
You were surrounded by people who didn't want to not believe, but they wanted to understand why they believed. And I think that's an important thing for us to think about. When people genuinely want to believe, you want to have the knowledge of why we're a Seventh-day Adventist. We're not saying I don't want to be a Seventh-day Adventist. We're saying I want to be one, but I want to know why I am one. It's this very openness to really digging in and understanding our beliefs. And I think that we need to be more welcoming of that in our homes, our churches, in our schools. And our safe answer cannot be, well, because that's what we believe.
Yeah.
And then shutting them down and moving on.
Exactly.
Because what we're teaching people then is that it is not safe to ask your questions. And they will keep all those questions inside. And somebody will answer those questions for them someday. And it will not be from the same spot that hopefully we would.
Completely agree. Yeah.
I love the fact that you had this community that you have built. To me, community seems to be like your story. Community has really been the thing that has really inspired you and kept you like solid and helped you in your spiritual growth. So you're in Australia, you're struggling through, you're learning these beliefs. I also want to appreciate that. I love that you say that there's still things you have question marks on. There are things we will not know until heaven. Yeah. And sometimes faith means that we act without always having all the answers. We will not always have the answers. There are things that have happened in my life I do not understand why. I can't even look back and be like, oh, I can see how God moved in this. I can just see a really traumatic experience.
Yeah.
In heaven, maybe I'll understand something a little bit more deeply. Same with our beliefs. Sometimes maybe I don't fully grasp how this really works, but I have enough faith to believe that God knows. And I don't have anything that like competes with it, so I don't need to really worry about it. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. When I do, then I will need to continue to study further.
Yes, completely agree. There will be things that we will not understand until we're in heaven. And the other point is that I don't believe we should put a solid box around the church and our beliefs, as in we want to question. Our girls are asking questions and we need to dig for those answers. But, I don't think we should be so close-minded that we do close off the box around the church and say, this is it. Now we just have to defend that position. I think we should always be questioning, always understanding, again, why we believe what we believe or why we may not believe certain elements. And it's okay to be a little bit gray. I don't think we can confidently have a yes, no on everything in life. There's things that we're hitting in society now that I know the church is grappling with, but it's okay to be honest that the church is grappling with those, because if we're just always taking this definitive position, either yes or no on, and I won't get into what the issues might be, but this idea that we have all the answers, because as a church, we don't. Society is changing. We can't hope to have the answer for everything, but we know what one answer is, and that is obviously a personal connection with Jesus and all that brings. Because I think when we try and be definitive on every position, we then run the risk of alienating certain groups. And so, it's okay that we don't have all the answers, I think.
Well, I think actually our early pioneers would agree with you. Our pioneers grappled. They did not all agree with everything in the beginning. They had to study it out. And we, as a church, believe in progressive revelation, in progressive truth. We don't have all the answers yet. Even the beginning of our 28 fundamental beliefs states that because we know that truth is always being revealed, that there may come a time where new beliefs will be added. There are certain things that we kind of know. We can put those in the box. The Sabbath, we feel pretty, we know that this one's true. The state of the dead, that hell is not an everlasting, ever-burning thing. We know that there are certain things, but there are a lot of things that as time comes, just like as time progresses, that we all of a sudden are like, oh, this is something new. And just like they did back then, the church needs to be willing to struggle together, as you're saying, to try to study it out, to come to better understandings. And we need to have the openness to do that.
Yes.
So back to your story. I love this. I love this conversation because we are hearing your story, but we're learning also a lot about how you grow and how your beliefs are. So I love this. I told you at the beginning of this, it's like we don't know where the conversation is going to go. I can't give you prepared questions because you never know. Yeah. At some point, Korey, you get a call or you apply. I don't know. Tell me how. How do you end up working for the church? Because working for the church, it takes a certain person to be willing to work for the church, because at least in many places, it's not like, you're getting this huge pay increase and like all the perks. But there is definitely a purpose that you feel in your heart when you start working for the church.
And I'd always had that. So as in right after like schooling into the college years, university years, I'd always wanted to work for the church in some capacity. And I think, I'd never really had a bad experience with the church. Yeah,
I want to know why.
It's I don't know. I can't really clearly articulate it. It's just this feeling that I do want to work for the church. And when I think about it now, I sort of think, I can give you the professional, because I believe in the purpose of the church and all this sort of thing. But even just back then as a young kid, I just thought, I want to work for the church. But I never had an answer why.
Do you think that seeing your dad work in the church and Kelly's father had worked for the church, do you think that helped, or it was just always within you that you wanted to do this?
Well, it was a bit of both. So my dad actually wasn't working for the church at that stage. He's a teacher and he was working in the state system. My mum, most of her life worked for the church through Sanitarium Health Food Company. My grandfather, he was a pastor, a youth director, all of that. Same with Kelly's side. So there's always been that good Adventist connection. And even though, I've seen the other side of the organization, my grandfather went through struggles with, not being reappointed into key positions and how they struggle with that and how that affected, members in the church. But I was always able to compartmentalize that and still had this desire to work for the church. And so when, studying human resources, there wasn't that many opportunities in the church to get into the HR door. So one opened up and I applied for it and got the acceptance, and we were in Brisbane, and we got the call to then move to Sydney to work at the South Pacific Division in the area of employment promotions. So the idea was to start, the work had already commenced with previous people, but the idea was to try and find more employees for the church, for both the Sydney Adventist Hospital, Sanitarium Health Food, and for the division itself, because, we struggle to find professional employees who are willing to work for the church and in often ways sacrifice in different ways. And so we wanted to promote employment. Many people didn't really know the scope of what Adventist employment was. The older days it was you're either a pastor, teacher, or a nurse. That's how you work for the church, and maybe clerical. But There's like over 110 different vocations you could do within church employment within the South Pacific Division. So we wanted to get that message out there. So that was my first role in working for the church, and I did that for a number of years and thoroughly enjoyed it. It was my first job within the church, and just had a great experience. And then from there moved into
yeah. For those who are listening, who maybe have only lived in their division their entire life, you're from South Pacific Division. We obviously know Australia, but what is part of South Pacific Division? Because you're talking about you're like HR trying to find people. Is this just Australia?
Yeah.
Where are you helping people find jobs in?
So for the Sydney Adventist Hospital, it was mainly in Australia. For Sanitarium, they had operations in Australia and New Zealand. And then for the South Pacific Division is the whole division territory, which is about 16 countries across Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, and right across the Pacific Islands. It's like a wonderful territory.
So somebody had to go to Tahiti, and it might as well be you.
Look, it was a struggle, and I do regret not putting sunscreen when I was swimming there, and I got very sunburnt on my back on one trip to Tahiti. But no, look, it was a chore, but I did it, and it was a wonderful experience traveling across the Pacific. It's the best division.
In the best division?
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, all right, we'll let that one go. We'll let that one go, Korey. All right, so you worked for South Pacific Division. You were helping them find it. You mentioned there's like multiple different jobs. I want to explore that just a little bit. I know that isn't necessarily like your story, but there is an interesting thing that you mentioned, is that there are not a lot of job openings in HR. You always want to work for the church, but you didn't pick the typical routes. So you're not a pastor. You're not in healthcare, and you're not a teacher. I feel very much the same way. Like, I've always wanted to work for the church, but I'm a creative. Like, where do creatives go, you know? But you've worked in HR now. Can you just speak a little bit to the struggles for finding people, Adventist, for these positions, and like what the needs of the church are for like developing and growing this area? Because that's something you probably had to wrestle with.
I think a lot of it is there's a lot of misconceptions about Adventist employment. So a lot of people actually didn't know the depth and the breadth of what working for the church can look like. Again, you assume it's pastor, nurse, teacher, or a few other vocations, but the church is a very professional organization. And has been well structured for many, many years and built up over time to be a very professional organization, at least from my perspective, what I've witnessed. And it was about getting that message out there. So when I would go to career fairs, even at the Adventist colleges, and I'd say, have you ever thought of working for the church? They said, no. Why would I work for the church? I'm an accountant, I'm an auditor, or, I'd say, well, we need you. We need people like you who believe in the church, believe in why we exist as a church, but then bring the professional side to it and work in an area that you obviously want to work in, but at the same time work for something bigger, work for a purpose beyond just yourself. And so in the end, it wasn't actually that hard firstly, I found it easy selling working for the church because I always wanted to do it and I was enjoying doing it, and I had the opportunity to work with such wonderful people. So I was a great advocate for working for the church.
So note to people who work in HR who are listening to this podcast right now, find a Korey.
Yes, absolutely.
Because if you're passionate, it's not hard to sell something you're passionate about.
Exactly. It wasn't hard. It wasn't hard at all. And so I loved talking to students and saying, look, think about Adventist careers as an opportunity for you, because we do very well at career development. There's a lot of progression actually within church employment, within the structure.
See, now people don't think that. No. They feel like, okay, well, I can't grow, I can't do anything. But that's really not the case.
It's not. It obviously depends on the area, and we can always do better in that space. But when you think about all of the different, like even just from, we're at the general conference, if you think of all the different entities and ministries, and there is just so much opportunity.
Are there any job openings in ADRA right now? I'm joking. I'm good. I like where I am.
Well, so that's the next thing. Now working for ADRA, again, it is not hard to sell working for ADRA.
No.
It's just one of those places that people want to work because it's such a deep, purposeful one.
We haven't even gotten there yet. So yeah, I know. This is...
So yeah, it was an easy job for me to do. And even when I would see, committee decisions or things happen that I didn't agree with, again, like I said, I was able to compartmentalize that, and I had to spend a little bit of time also talking to staff about that as well, because a decision comes and they're very upset and they're angry, and for me the importance was not to try and first cover it up, not to try and justify it. It was about compartmentalizing it, because the last thing you want, firstly, is for it to affect your personal faith. There's always going to be decisions and things happen that you don't agree with. But it's also about being transparent about it, talking openly about the things you struggle with or the things you disagree with, because then we grow as an organization. So we wanted, back at the division, very open, transparent discussions. Again, I think we can always do that better, and there's certain areas when I look back now we should have done better. But there was always a willingness, and you view on social media criticisms of leaders in church, whether it be the president or the whatever position.
I've never seen those.
No, that's good. And it used to frustrate me because they would be complaining about a particular president, and I've worked with that person, and I know them from a different side, and I know that what they're being criticized of is just not true, because I've had the privilege of working with so many people who passionately believe in why they do what they do and why the church is there. You still may disagree with decisions, but not their intent or their underlying motives can't be questioned, because they believe they're doing the right thing at the time. I don't know how we got onto that side, but
it's very true though. And it's one of the reasons why we're doing this is because we sit here in this building, and I think most people don't know who we really are. I see, because I do, strategy for the Adventist Church's social media. So I read all the comments. And, I often hear people make sweeping statements of everyone who works in this building. And I'm like, yeah, you obviously don't know me at all, because that doesn't even clearly show who I am.
Because we work in the ivory tower.
Yeah. But it's a challenge. And I can imagine, especially from the HR perspective, you had to know, you knew inside stuff that the rest of us who even work don't know. And so it's hard because you see all the parts of this journey, all the parts of the process, but we also cannot defend it. We often cannot say anything. One, it won't help, but sometimes it's not even legal.
Exactly.
So it's like you have to sit there and watch these accusations, which for some people can become very hard.
Very hard. Yeah.
Because it's not true, and you want to defend the truth. But you have to sit there and listen to ignorance, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. And that hurts. That's something I've really struggled with, and struggled with it acutely in the last sort of 18 months. And stress was building up for me because some things were happening, decisions were being made that we were struggling with. And not to go into that side of things, but I was holding on to a lot of stress because I was seeing things that I really didn't agree with. But I knew it wasn't the church. There was circumstances that were sort of beyond anyone's control. And I was just sort of grappling with a lot of that, and my own stress was building up, and I wasn't carrying that well, and so I had some health challenges at the start of the year. And
can we talk about that?
Yeah.
So you're relatively young. I'm not going to put an age on you because that way we're safe. But I would say I like to call our age group the GC young.
Okay.
We're not in this old category. We're late 30s, early 40s
to mid 40s.
Okay, we're gonna go in that general route. Okay, so we're GC young. You had a heart attack at the beginning of this year.
I did.
You look like the epitome of health. I would never have guessed. You're a healthy young father. That's what most people would see. And you have 3 daughters. Tell us about having a heart attack and what it has taught you.
Yeah, it wasn't how we expected to start the year. That's for sure. And we'd just come through COVID, and there's sort of light at the end of the tunnel, and then suddenly the start of the year, I had a heart attack back in January. And,
where were you?
My wife and I were actually holidaying in New York. My parents were over, so we used over from Australia. We used the opportunity to have babysitters, so we went away for a few days. Unfortunately, it was that first morning we were riding through Central Park and just started to get a little short of breath, a little tightness in my chest, and I was riding up a hill, and then when I'd go down the hill, it would ease. So I just kept going, and then it came back again. I got some pain down my left arm. Eventually pulled over and was feeling quite nauseous, and long story short, I was having a heart attack. Right near an amazing hospital, which was great, and so we went straight through an urgent care facility and then ambulance to a hospital, which was right near where we were. But the miracle was I got urgent care straight away. So within 2 hours of the first symptoms of the heart attack, I was having 2 stents inserted to fix the 3 blockages. So within 2 hours. Yeah. So it was just such a miracle.
How was Kelly doing during all of this?
The hard thing was we'd hired bikes, and so she was actually taking the bikes back to the rental because they had my license. So, because we were renting the bikes. And I'm trying to text her saying, it might just be angina or just something. They're just going to check on me. What I learnt later was they don't tell you you're having a heart attack, because then that also can raise your stress levels and make it worse. So they were trying to protect me. So I said, they're just taking me in for monitoring, find out more about it.
So taking from urgent care
to the hospital. Okay. And I didn't know it was serious until they wheeled me into the hospital, and there's about 15 medical staff lined up, ready to go.
Like they're ready for you.
They're ready for me. And then the cardiologist came in straight away and said, we've got your chart here. You're having a heart attack. And
what was your thought in that moment? Like
just disbelief. I always knew we've got a family history of heart issues. On my dad's side, my grandfather had a massive heart attack and died a few months after. My auntie, so my dad's sister, died of a heart attack, and my dad has coronary heart disease. So I knew at some point we'd have to deal with it, but not at 43 when I was.
Do you feel like when you hear these words, did you feel like I'm not done yet? Like, because you have this history of people who they have a heart attack in your family and, they're dying. You have 3 young children. As a human, as a father, as a husband, forget work. We don't care. I mean, ADRA can find another HR director.
Absolutely.
But you're your girl's father. Did you have any thoughts, any emotions about that kind of a thing? Or was it just so fast and you kind of thought about maybe afterward?
It was after. Because even at the time, I was in pain, but it wasn't the traditional signs that you think of a heart attack, this, collapsing and suddenly you're out of it. I was in pain, but it wasn't debilitating. So it didn't click until after the surgery. And I was awake the whole time for the surgery. So, but it was no pain. It was just a nice, easy insertion into my arm there. And they put the scope up and they put the stents in. And
modern technology.
Amazing. And so it wasn't until after when we rang the girls, and then it sort of hit me as you're sort of explaining to them. So that was hard. That's when I realized how serious it was. And even after, when the cardiologist was talking to my wife, to Kelly, and he said, look, there's a million ways this could have gone. And in every scenario, it was the best case scenario. So again, it was at those moments that I realized, this could have gone the other way. I'm actually, it's a miracle I made it through because of a whole range of reasons, even though it was a relatively mild heart attack, and thankfully there's no damage to my heart. And where we were right next to this most amazing hospital for cardiology care. So if you're ever planning to have a heart attack, I'll tell you where to go in Central Park. There's a region there you're very safe.
All right, so noted. If I'm going to have a heart attack, definitely go to Central Park.
Go to Central Park.
I have a couple different hospitals for if I ever get into a horrible car crash, I know to be in Denver area because there's a great. So just so you know, we should create this list of fabulous hospitals in America for just in case scenarios.
Yeah. So it was that I got the intervention so quickly. And the type of heart attack that it was, my outlook is very good. Now I still stress about it. Any little pain I get, I think, oh, hang on, let me just double check that. I get my watch out and I check my app. And so I don't ever stop really thinking about it. Not a day goes by when it's not somewhere in my mind. But it's another chance at life. And I have to stop and remember that and make the most of what I've got left, because I don't want to it to end. Like, as in, obviously I can't wait for the second coming, but I'm loving my life. I love the family I have, the job I have, and there's so many more things I want to do and so many more opportunities I want to be involved in. So yeah, it's teaching me to take each day as it comes, because you don't know what's coming that day. It also makes me rethink about how I handle stress. I was carrying a lot of stress, and you do think that you're the only one that can do everything, and I'm not great at delegating, and so I need to do that.
I feel like we're very kindred spirits, and I didn't know this until this interview, because we've talked a lot, but we have maybe not some of the best same not some of the best parts of
because I'm blessed to work with such amazing people, but I still like to do things myself. And when it was that night of the heart attack, and I'm telling the other VPs and the president, and I'm starting to think through everything that is going to fall and everything that has to be done. Firstly, the organization did really well. I wasn't actually that missed, because we have such wonderful people. I'm sure you were
missed, but they were able to move forward.
They were. And the way I think about it now is that we should all actually have that as front and center, especially in a leadership position. What happens if you did? We used to say the term, what happens if you step in front of a bus? How does the work continue after you? Mm-hmm. How are you developing and empowering those around you? And you've got systems in place. And so it's forced me to be a little bit more structured in how I do my own work, and to actually set more boundaries. And, it's okay to say no. I couldn't say no to you doing this interview, but it's okay to say no.
Yeah, I literally approached you during our children's Christmas concert. Well, at the end of the children's Christmas concert.
I couldn't say no. But, like, again, within the church, I think that's been an issue, that we just keep adding and adding, and we don't like to say no. But you've got to know where your boundaries are and what where your limits are. And I've seen too much burnout within the church. People just don't often know when to say, I can't take on anymore.
And it's a challenge, and especially you work in HR, so you see this a lot. It's a challenge on both sides, both the boss and the employee, because a boss is going to continue to give you work because they want to make sure you have work, right? And they don't necessarily know our limits. But we're not always the best for advocating for our limits, because we're like, well, it's my job, so I need to do my job. At least that's my struggle. And I'm very fortunate to have two bosses who remind me that I maybe don't always have the best work-life balance, and remind me I need to take vacations, stuff like that. But I think especially when you work for the church, is this purpose, this higher like purpose that is also in our core. So I think it makes it even more of a struggle. Like, if I don't do this, but like, what if? Like, and it's this higher purpose that we sometimes also feel accountable for, not just my job, but the work, like the work. And it's a challenge for us.
It is. It's funny you mentioned that during our Mission Institute, which was a wonderful experience.
What is Mission Institute?
So Mission Institute is when you're an international employee and you're moving within the church system, you go to a 3-week Mission Institute where they help prepare you for mission service overseas.
So you went to this. So you were at South Pacific Division, and then when you came here,
yeah. So on our way over, we went via Thailand, where the General Conference Institute of World Mission ran their Mission Institute for 3 weeks, and it was wonderful timing. It just worked out so well that we disconnected in Australia. We were starting to make our way to the US, and we get to have this 3-week time in Chiang Mai, where there's programs for the kids, programs for us, and it just helps to prepare you for mission service, for working in a different culture, for understanding how you look at things differently.
And they have stuff for kids too.
They do,
because it's not just you
exactly
who is a part of this mission movement. It's the whole family.
Exactly. And I remember this one quote that one of the participants said there. Don't be so focused on finishing the work that the work finishes you. Because again, within the church, there's always more to do. There's always something and because we believe in what we do, it's hard to draw that line, because you love what you're doing. You just want to do more, but your body can't always handle the more. And so, and it's that constant question of burnout, whose responsibility is it? Is it the employees? Is it the organizations? It's a bit of both. You've got to sort of be compassionate enough to know and to walk by your employees, to know where they're at, and both party needs to feel comfortable and open that they can say, hey, I'm struggling. Because again, we're good stewards of our organizations, and we have finite resources, and we try and maximize what we can do with those limited resources. And so we tend to push the areas that there's a bit of elasticity there. So that's people. So we push more and more, and we need to do better at recognizing the warning signs when people are hitting their limits. And looking back pre-heart attack, I could see some warning signs now that I was hitting my limit. COVID was very difficult. That was a hard time. Couldn't see our family. We're stuck in this wonderful country of the US, which I love, but
but it's not your country.
It's not our country.
It's not your home.
Our family weren't there. You're still managing through the stresses of a pandemic. You're also managing an organization that's responding to the pandemic, and you're trying to balance all these.
You're also being a father to children who are going through a pandemic,
exactly.
And that's a whole.
I have a whole new appreciation for teachers. When you're homeschooling. Wow. It was hard. It was also a meaningful time too, because we weren't traveling. So we were, as a family, we actually look back on many instances that were wonderful through the pandemic. But then, you're starting to manage the return to work and balancing hybrid work and all of this sort of thing, and trying to keep employees motivated and create the best scenario for them to contribute, which is not always the same way that they think they should contribute. So balancing all of that, and then some big stresses too that we were dealing with. And so when I look back, I can see the warning signs that led to the heart attack, because I think a fair bit of it was stress. And so I'm trying to do better managing it.
So for those of you who have listened all the way to the end of this, we're almost near the end, because we do want to talk a little bit about ADRA and the work that ADRA does. But I want to encourage you, if you are listening to this or watching this right now, that if you feel like you're in a situation where the stress is getting high, take a step back and to take care of yourself. My boss, talks about the fact that it's, God, and then family, and then work. And I kind of put myself in that family area, self-care matters. It genuinely matters. And it's not just, let's go to the spa. It's taking care of our health mentally and emotionally and physically. And I just want to encourage all of you to take a step back if you're starting to feel anxiety, feeling stressed out, and evaluate what are some things that maybe you can do. Be vulnerable with your bosses. I actually just went through an experience where I was very vulnerable with my bosses, that I was feeling some anxiety and just like I was very stressed. And it's hard to be vulnerable, but it is so important in order to be able to take care of ourselves.
Yes. Right through the pandemic, the example we kept using was, when you hop on a plane and they give you the safety briefing and they tell you, please put your oxygen mask on before helping others. And it's a really good analogy because you can't help others unless you're also helping yourself. You've got to actually look after yourself so you're more effective at looking after others. It doesn't mean you become selfish, but it means you can only operate under certain circumstances, and you've got to create the environment that you're most effective. And so looking after yourself is such a critical element for all leaders as well, because you can't lead someone else if you're not looking after yourself as well.
And I think if we're looking after ourselves, we also can see it in our employees. We can maybe see the signs. Like my boss, Williams, went through a similar situation with health. And when everyone listens to his podcast, they will hear that story, I am sure. But therefore, he sees it in his employees. You will be more likely to see that sense of burnout because you've now experienced the actual traumatic implications of not heeding that. But let's end. We're going to come to an end here, but we want to talk about your time here with ADRA before we go, because it's where you've been for, is it 7 years now?
7 years, yeah.
For 7 years. So you've been working for ADRA, which is the humanitarian side. I like to say it's like it's kind of like the Marines. It's the people who go in first to be able to help. We are meeting the physical needs of humanity. What is it like working there? And how has it helped you connect more to the church? And as a side question, I'm giving you lots to answer here, these final minutes, but how do you think that ADRA resonates especially with this generation?
Yeah, there's a lot to answer.
Sorry.
Firstly, I just love what we do. When you enter the field of human resources, you're not on the front line in anything. You're always in the back office. You're writing policies, or you're dealing with disputes between employees, or terminations, or all that sort of things that people say, why do you work in human resources? But to work for an organization where I can do what I actually love doing for such a deep purpose as serving humanity, so all may live as God intended, how can you not love what you do? And so seeing the impact that ADRA has right across the globe in being the hands and feet of Jesus for the church is just such a privilege, and one that I need to not take for granted, because it's such an amazing opportunity to do what you love, but for an organization with such a deep purpose. And so I think ADRA resonates particularly with this generation because the generation wants to do things, there are important elements of the church right across the whole spectrum of what we do. But there's something special about ministering to a need, to seeing a need and to filling that need instantly, whether it be through an emergency response or a long-term development project. You can see tangible difference right away. And that's something pretty special that we get to do. And I love how the church has been set up, that ADRA is such a key part of our mission as a church, because we when Jesus came to this earth, one of the key things was he ministered to the needs. He healed the sick. He fed the poor and the hungry, and that's our role now, and it's still our role today. Obviously, I look forward to a world where that need is not there, but the need is only growing. And to be a part of just filling that need as much as we can is a real privilege.
Korey, I just want to thank you so much for your authenticity today. I love that we've kind of talked a lot about the importance of community, because I think that sometimes people talk about the Adventist bubble in a very negative way. But it's so important to be with people who are like-minded as well. You've also had the experience of being able to be pushed and to be able to grow by being with others who aren't, but having this close circle of people who are like-minded to journey through life with, to be able to ask the hard questions together is such a beautiful takeaway for me that I'm taking away from your story. And also the idea of taking care of ourselves. I don't think it's something that comes naturally to many of us. And as leaders, one of the best things we can do is model good behavior. So I love that. It's something that I struggle with daily because I do have this deep purpose and I want to keep working. And but sometimes we need to be still. And that's sometimes hard for some of us, a little bit more than others. And I especially want to say how much I appreciate you talking about how your faith has grown. That it's not something that was just amazing, whatever, but just talking about this slow uphill progression, but allowing yourself the privilege to ask the questions, to experience that growth. I just want to thank you so much for coming here and for joining us. I hope all of you really have enjoyed hearing from Korey and hearing a little bit more about who he is. I want to encourage you, if you are not familiar with the work of ADRA, to go online, adra.org, learn more about what they do. If you are someone who is looking for a job in the humanitarian sector or want to volunteer, ADRA has a beautiful program for collegiate young people called Connections, where you can go on mission trips that make a difference, where you can explore the humanitarian arm of the church. I want to encourage you to go learn more about ADRA and how you can be the hands and feet of Jesus today. If you are a young person or an old person, or anywhere in between, but who has felt a call, who knows, maybe one day you'll get to meet Korey and be interviewed for working with ADRA. I encourage you, if you are listening to this in whatever format, to subscribe to this podcast. You can continue to hear the stories of the leaders from the General Conference Leadership Council. Learn who these leaders are. Learn from our stories, become a better person, because after all, this is basically mentorship from learning from some of the best leaders that the church has. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to talking with you again next week.